You know the stories. A sea splits down the middle. An iron axe head floats. A dead man is dropped into a grave, touches old bones, and stands up. And somewhere along the way, most of us absorbed an idea about the Old Testament, that it is a book where this sort of thing happens more or less constantly. It is not. Line up every miracle in the Hebrew Scriptures in the order it actually happens, and the strange thing is not any single wonder. It is the shape. They do not spread out evenly. They bunch. Two enormous knots, a scatter of singles, and between the knots, centuries where nothing breaks at all. David reigns 40 years. He is the great king, the man after God's own heart, the center of the whole national story. Count the miracles in his reign. You will not need many fingers. Solomon builds the temple. Fire falls once on the altar, and then the wonders essentially stop for the better part of a century and a half. Nobody parts anything. Nobody rises. Prophets speak, kings rise and fall, armies march, and the ordinary world stays completely, stubbornly ordinary. So this is every miracle recorded in the Old Testament, in the order the text puts them, from the flood to the fish. And here is the one thing the order shows you, which no single story ever can. The miracles cluster at exactly two kinds of moment: when a people is being made, and when that people is one generation from disappearing entirely. Everywhere else, the sky stays shut. That silence is not a gap in the record. It is part of the argument the book is making. But before we can count them, we have to be honest about a problem. Nobody agrees on what a miracle is. Ask 10 people and you get 10 lists. So here is the line this video draws, and you should know exactly where it sits. A miracle, for our purposes, is a moment where the narrative reports something happening that the ordinary world does not do and attributes it directly to God. That means creation itself is out. Not because it is small, but because it is the baseline. You cannot interrupt a world that does not exist yet. Visions are out too. And that decision matters more than it sounds. Ezekiel's Valley of Dry Bones is the famous casualty. Because Ezekiel is explicit, he is brought there in the spirit, and the text interprets itself. These bones, it says, are the whole house of Israel. It is a picture of a nation coming home from exile, not a field of corpses standing up in real time. Magnificent, but not an event. Prophecy is out, unless the sign is physical, and answered prayer is out unless the answer bends something. Otherwise, every page qualifies. Draw the line anywhere else, and your total moves. That is not a flaw in the counting. It is the honest situation. With that settled, start at the beginning, and notice immediately how little there is. From the garden to Egypt is roughly 2,000 years of narrative. In all of it, you can count the miracles on two hands. The first is a disappearance. Genesis chapter 5 is a list of men who lived and died, lived and died, lived and died. Then one entry breaks the pattern. Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. The formula, and he died, simply never arrives. The text says nothing about heaven, nothing about a chariot, only an absence and a taking. It is the quietest miracle in the Bible. The next is the loudest, the flood. And the numbers are worth getting right, because almost everyone rounds them wrong. Rain falls for 40 days and 40 nights, but the waters prevail on the earth for 150 days, and those 40 are inside the 150, not added to them. The ark comes to rest in the 7th month, on the mountains of Ararat. Plural. A range, not a single peak. And from the day the deep bursts open to the day the ground is finally dry is a year and 11 days, longer than a year. A whole cycle of seasons afloat. Then Babel, which nobody thinks of as a miracle and which fits the definition perfectly. One language, one city, one tower with its top in the heavens. And God comes down and confuses their speech, so they cannot understand each other. A wonder performed on the inside of human heads. Then Abraham, and 2 miracles in the same week, pointing in opposite directions. At Sodom, 2 visitors are surrounded at Lot's door, and the men outside are struck with blindness, small and great, until they wear themselves out, groping for a handle they cannot find. Remember that blindness. The Hebrew word for it appears in only one other place in the entire Bible, more than 1,000 years later, and we will get there. Then the fire. And the text is more specific than the memory of it. Sulfur and fire rained from the Lord out of heaven on Sodom and on Gomorrah, and on the whole valley, though not on all of it. Lot begs for one small town, Zoar, and Zoar is spared. The destruction has an exception written into it. And behind him, his wife looks back and becomes a pillar of salt. One sentence. The text does not explain it and does not linger. And in the same stretch, the opposite kind of wonder. Abraham is 99 when the promise comes, and he laughs at the arithmetic of it. 100 years old, he says, and Sarah 90. He is 100 exactly when Isaac is born. The first miracle of the covenant is not a fire, it is a baby. Then one more, and it is the strangest in Genesis. Jacob, alone at a river ford in the dark, and a man wrestles him until daybreak. The text calls him a man. Only a man. It never says angel. But the man dislocates Jacob's hip with a touch and renames him Israel, for you have striven with God. And Jacob names the place Peniel, because he has seen God face to face and lived. He walks away with a limp he keeps. And that is the entire supernatural inventory of Genesis. A vanishing, a flood, a scattering, a blinding, a burning, a birth, and a wrestling match. Then the book turns a page into Exodus, and the floodgates open. What happens next is the densest concentration of miracles anywhere in the Hebrew Bible. And it happens inside a single human lifetime. It starts small. A bush on a mountainside, burning and not burning up. A man turns aside to look at why. And when he objects that nobody will believe him, he is handed 3 signs. Not 1. 3 in a fixed order, and the third one has a condition on it. Sign 1. Throw down your staff. It becomes a serpent. Pick it up by the tail, and it is a staff again. Sign 2. Put your hand inside your cloak. It comes out leprous, white as snow. Put it back, and it comes out whole. Sign 3 is given conditionally. If they will not believe even these 2, take water from the Nile, pour it on dry ground, and it will turn to blood, which is a preview, because that is exactly how the confrontation begins. The plagues are 10, and we have unpacked them in their own video, so here they are as one movement, because that is what they are. Blood, frogs, gnats, flies, the livestock, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and the firstborn. And inside that sequence, 2 details that most retellings drop, and both of them are the point. The first is where the Egyptian magicians stop. They match the blood, they match the frogs, and then, at the gnats, they simply cannot. And it is the magicians themselves who say it. This is the finger of God. 3 plagues in, the opposition concedes the category. By the boils, they cannot even stand in the room. They are afflicted with everyone else, and they vanish from the story entirely. The second detail is the exemption. In 5 of the 10, the text goes out of its way to say, Israel is untouched. The flies do not come to Goshen. The livestock do not die there. No hail falls there. Where the Egyptians sit in darkness, the Israelites have light in their dwellings. And on the last night, the distinction becomes the whole mechanism. The plague is not geographic anymore. It is a doorframe. Then the sea. And here is the line people quote wrong more than any other in Exodus. Moses stretches out his hand. And the Lord drove the sea back by a strong east wind all night, and made the sea dry land. A named mechanism and a duration. All night. It is not an instant vertical wall snapping open in a single frame, and yet the very next verse says the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. The text holds both pictures at once and never resolves them. They cross. The waters return at morning. Of the army behind them, the text says, not one of them remained. 3 days later, they are dying of thirst, which tells you something about how miracles work in this book. They do not carry over. At Marah, the water is bitter and undrinkable. And the Lord shows Moses a log, and he throws it into the water, and the water becomes sweet. Not a chant, not a staff, a piece of wood thrown in a pool. The wilderness miracles are almost all like this, domestic, unglamorous, about lunch. Then bread. In the evening, quail cover the camp. In the morning, when the dew lifts, there is something fine and flake-like on the ground, like frost. And they say to each other, what is it? Which, in Hebrew, is roughly what the name means. They name the miracle after their own confusion. It tastes, the text says, like wafers made with honey. And it falls every morning for 40 years, until the day after they eat food grown in Canaan. And then it stops. Not gradually. The day after the first harvest, the manna ceases and never comes again. Then water from rock, at a place called Massa and Meribah. Strike the rock, God says, and Moses strikes it, and water comes out. Hold on to that instruction, because 38 years later it happens again, and the difference between the two is the reason Moses never enters the land. Then Amalek attacks, and the strangest battle in the Bible is fought. When Moses holds up his hand, Israel prevails. When he lowers it, Amalek does. So Aaron and Hur sit him on a stone and hold his arms up, one on each side, until the sun goes down. A miracle that runs on 2 men's shoulders. Then Sinai. Thunder and lightning, a thick cloud, a trumpet blast so loud the people shake, and a mountain wrapped in smoke because God has come down on it in fire. Smoke going up like the smoke of a kiln, and the whole mountain trembling, and the trumpet getting louder, not softer. It is the loudest scene in the Old Testament. And Moses comes down from it changed. The skin of his face shines, and he does not know it, and the people are afraid to come near him. The Hebrew verb there shares a root with the word for horn, rays, projecting like horns of light, which is how 1,000 years of European art ended up putting horns on Moses. Then the wilderness turns dangerous, and the miracles turn into judgments. 4 of them in quick succession, and they are hard to read. Aaron's 2 eldest sons offer unauthorized fire before the Lord, fire he had not commanded. And fire comes out from before the Lord and consumes them. At Taberah the people complain, and the fire of the Lord burns among them and consumes the outlying parts of the camp, the edges. A warning shot. Then quail again. But this is not Exodus 16. This is a second event, nearly 40 years later, and it goes very differently. A wind brings them in, lying about 2 cubits deep over the ground, a day's journey in every direction. They gather for a day, and a night, and a day. And while the meat is still between their teeth, a plague strikes. They bury the dead, and name the place the graves of craving. Then Miriam and Aaron speak against Moses over his Cushite wife, and Miriam is struck leprous, white as snow, only Miriam. Aaron says exactly the same words and walks away clean. The text does not explain that either. She is shut outside the camp 7 days, and the entire nation waits for her before moving on. Then Korah's rebellion, and 2 separate judgments, which almost every retelling fuses into one. The ground opens and swallows Dathan and Abiram and their households, and separately fire comes out from the Lord and consumes the 250 men holding incense. Then a plague, and 14,700 more die before it is stopped. 3 tolls, 3 mechanisms, 1 afternoon. And then a footnote that changes the tone completely. Numbers 26 pauses to say the sons of Korah did not die. His line survives, which is why, centuries later, you can open the Psalms and find songs of the sons of Korah. The judgment did not go all the way down. Then a gentler sign. 12 staffs, 1 per tribe, laid up overnight in the tent of the testimony. In the morning Aaron's staff has sprouted, put forth buds, produced blossoms, and borne ripe almonds. All 4 stages at once, on dead wood, overnight. Then the second rock. And this is the one that costs. God's instruction is different this time. Not strike, speak. Tell the rock to yield its water in front of them. And Moses lifts his hand and strikes the rock with the staff. Twice. The text records the second blow, and the second blow is not an accident. Water comes anyway, abundantly. The miracle is not withheld. But Moses is told he will not bring this assembly into the land, and he never does. Then the fiery serpents and the bronze one. And there is a small oddity in the text nobody mentions. God tells Moses to make a fiery serpent and set it on a pole. Moses makes it of bronze. Look at it, and the bitten live. It is a cure with no medicine in it. You are healed by looking at an image of the thing that is killing you. Then, on the border, the funniest miracle in the Bible. And it is genuinely funny. And it is a real one. Balaam is riding to curse Israel. His donkey sees an armed angel in the road 3 times, and swerves 3 times, and is beaten 3 times. And then the Lord opens the mouth of the donkey, and it argues with him, out loud. And Balaam argues back, without apparently noticing that his donkey is talking. The prophet who cannot see is corrected by the animal who can. And that is the last miracle before Moses dies. Count what we have just walked through. Roughly 30 distinct miracles, from the bush to the donkey, inside 80 years. That is not number 1, and nothing in the rest of the Old Testament comes close to that density until the 9th century before Christ. Then the crossing. Joshua leads them to the Jordan, and the text is careful to tell you the season. The Jordan overflows all its banks throughout the time of harvest. It is at flood stage. This is the worst possible month to attempt it, and that is the point. The priests carrying the ark step in, and the moment their feet touch the brink, the water stops. And the text tells you where. The waters rose up in a heap very far away at Adam, the city beside Zarethan, miles upstream. Nobody standing at the ford could have seen it happen. The nation crosses on dry ground. The priests come up, and the Jordan returns to its banks and overflows them as before. Then Jericho. And the arithmetic is precise and worth doing. Once around each day for 6 days. Then 7 times on the 7th day. 13 circuits in total, with 7 priests carrying 7 ram's horns. Then a long blast, a shout from the whole army, and the wall falls down flat. No ram, no ladder, no siege. Then Gibeon, and this is the famous one. And the famous part is not the impressive part. Because before the sun does anything at all, the Lord throws down great stones from heaven on the fleeing army, all the way to Azekah. And the text stops to make a comparison. There were more who died from the hailstones than the sons of Israel killed with the sword. A hailstorm outkilled an entire invading army in a single afternoon. That is the sentence, and almost nobody quotes it. Then Joshua speaks, and he addresses 2 objects, not one. Sun, stand still at Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped, about a whole day. And the text does something it almost never does. It cites a source. Is this not written in the book of Jashar, it asks, a book we do not have, quoted inside a book we do. And then the verdict. There has been no day like it before or since. The narrator knows this is the outlier. And then, almost immediately, the wonders thin out. The book of Judges runs for centuries and contains barely a handful. Gideon is the clearest, and his miracle is not a rescue. It is a man asking for proof twice and being given it twice without being scolded. Night 1. A wool fleece on the threshing floor. In the morning, the fleece is soaked and the ground around it is dry. He wrings out a bowlful, and then he asks again and reverses it. Night 2. The fleece dry and the ground wet. It happens exactly as asked. Then Samson, whose entire life is one continuing miracle, expressed in the same phrase every time. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. It is used when he tears a lion apart with his bare hands, as one tears a young goat. It is used when the ropes on his arms become like flax that has caught fire, and he picks up a fresh donkey's jawbone and strikes down 1,000 men. He carries the city gates of Gaza away on his shoulders, doors, posts, bar and all, up the hill that faces Hebron. And at the end, blind and chained between two pillars, he prays once and pulls the building down. And the dead he killed at his death were more than all he killed in his life. Then, a miracle with no human agent in it at all, which makes it unique. The ark is captured, and it goes to Philistia alone. They set it in the temple of Dagon. In the morning, Dagon is face down before it. They stand him up. Next morning, he is face down again, and this time, the head of Dagon and both his hands are lying cut off on the threshold. Only the trunk is left. Then tumors break out in Ashdod, and in Gath, and in Ekron. Every city that takes the ark begs to be rid of it. So they build a new cart, and yoke 2 milk cows that have never been yoked, and shut their calves up at home, and set the ark on the cart, and let it go. Every instinct in those animals says turn around, and they go straight up the road to Beth Shemesh, lowing as they walk, and do not turn aside to the right or the left. The Philistines had engineered a test that only a miracle could pass. It passed. Then Samuel, and a miracle made entirely of timing. He asks the people, "Is it not wheat harvest today?" Meaning the dry season, meaning it does not rain now. And he calls, and thunder and rain come that same day, and the people are terrified of him. And then the sky closes. And it stays closed for a very long time. This is the part of the pattern nobody teaches, and it is the most interesting stretch in the whole survey. Saul reigns. David reigns 40 years. Solomon reigns 40 more. This is the golden age. The kingdom is at its largest, richest, most secure. And in all of it, you can count the miracles on one hand. There is Uzzah at the threshing floor of Nacon when the oxen stumble and he puts out his hand to steady the ark and God strikes him down there. There is the plague after David's census, 70,000 dead, and an angel with his hand stretched out over Jerusalem stopped at a threshing floor, though be careful there. The sword in the angel's hand and the fire falling on David's altar are in Chronicles. 2 Samuel tells the same day with neither. And there is the temple. The cloud fills the house, so the priests cannot stand to minister, because the glory of the Lord filled the house of God. And in Chronicles, fire comes down and consumes the offering. In Kings, at the same dedication, there is only the cloud. 2 accounts, and they are not identical. And that is essentially it. 80 years of the most celebrated reigns in Israel's history, and the miraculous almost entirely absent, which should stop you, because it means the wonders are not a reward for faithfulness, and they are not a measure of how close God is. David has no sea to cross. He has an army, a capital, a treasury, and a throne. He does not need the ground to open, he needs to govern. The miracles came when there was no nation yet, and they will come back the moment there is about to be no nation again. There is one flash in the gap, and it points forward. The kingdom splits, and Jeroboam builds a rival altar at Bethel. An unnamed man of God confronts him there. The king stretches out his hand and says, "Seize him," and the hand dries up so he cannot pull it back. And the altar splits, and the ashes pour out, exactly as the man said. The king asks him to pray, and his hand is restored. A withered hand, healed by intercession at a false altar in the northern kingdom. It is a trailer for what is coming, because the north keeps going. Ahab marries a Phoenician princess named Jezebel and installs the storm god Baal as a state cult. Baal is the god who brings rain. That fact matters because of how the second great knot of miracles opens. A man nobody has heard of walks into the throne room and says there shall be neither dew nor rain these years, except by my word. And that is it. No debate, no credentials, no miracle to prove it. He announces a drought and walks out, and the drought comes. He attacks the rain god at the point of the rain, and how long it lasts depends on which book you read. 1 Kings says the word came in the 3rd year. The New Testament in James says 3 years and 6 months. The usual explanation is that they count from different starting points. Elijah hides at a brook called Cherith, east of the Jordan, and ravens bring him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening. Then the brook dries up, because the drought he called down does not exempt him, and he is sent somewhere astonishing, to Zarephath, which belongs to Sidon, which is Phoenicia, which is Jezebel's own country. He is sent to be fed by an enemy, and not by an enemy king, by a starving foreign widow with a handful of flour and a little oil, gathering sticks to cook a last meal for herself and her son. And the jar of flour is not spent, and the jug of oil does not run dry, for as long as it takes. A miracle measured in daily portions. Then her son stops breathing, and she turns on Elijah, and he takes the boy upstairs and stretches himself out on him 3 times and prays, "Let this child's life come into him again." And it does. It is the first resurrection in the Bible. Then Carmel, and the numbers here get repeated wrong constantly, so let us be exact. Ahab is told to summon 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah. 850 in the invitation. But when Elijah counts the opposition on the mountain, he says 450. The Asherah prophets are summoned and then never appear in the contest at all. They call on Baal from morning until noon. They limp around the altar. They cut themselves. And there is no voice, no answer, and no one paying attention. Then Elijah rebuilds a broken altar with 12 stones, digs a trench around it, and floods it. 4 jars of water poured 3 times, 12 jars in a drought. He prays one short prayer, about 60 words, and fire falls and consumes the offering, the wood, the stones, the dust, and the water in the trench, and then rain. He climbs to the top of Carmel and puts his face between his knees and sends his servant to look at the sea 7 times. 6 times, nothing. The 7th time, a cloud the size of a man's hand. And then the sky goes black and the drought breaks. And the next thing this man does, after fire from heaven, is sit under a bush and ask to die, which tells you the miracles were never fixing him. He walks south for 40 days, to Horeb, the same mountain Moses stood on. And what happens there is the strangest wonder in his whole cycle, because it is defined by what is not in it. A great wind tears the mountains apart, but the Lord was not in the wind. Then an earthquake, not in the earthquake. Then fire, not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. The Hebrew is famously untranslatable, something like a voice of thin silence. And that is when he covers his face. The prophet who called fire down is answered by the absence of fire. Every spectacular thing on that mountain is listed in order to be ruled out. Then, near the end, one more, and it is brutal. A king sends 50 soldiers and a captain to arrest him, and fire falls and consumes them. Then another 50. Then a third captain who kneels and begs and is spared. The text says fire consumed him and his 50 each time. 2 captains, 100 men, 102. Then the end. Elijah rolls up his cloak and strikes the Jordan, and it parts, and the two of them cross on dry ground, a prophet reenacting the Exodus with a coat. And Elisha asks for a double portion of his spirit, which is not a request for twice the power. It is a legal phrase. In the law of inheritance, the firstborn receives a double portion. Elisha is not asking to be greater than Elijah. He is asking to be his heir. And then chariots of fire and horses of fire separate them, and Elijah goes up by a whirlwind into heaven. Read that again because everyone gets it backwards. The chariot does not carry him. The chariot separates them. The whirlwind is what takes him up. And Elisha picks up the fallen cloak, walks back to the water, and strikes it. And it parts a second time. The inheritance is confirmed in the first 10 minutes. What follows is the densest run of miracles by any single person in the Old Testament. And what is remarkable is how small most of them are. The men of Jericho tell him the water is bad and the land unfruitful. He asks for a new bowl with salt in it, throws it in the spring, and the water is healed. Then the one everybody stumbles on. Boys from Bethel jeer at him, "Go up, you bald head," and 2 bears come out of the woods and maul 42 of them. 2 corrections. The Hebrew word covers everything from a small child to a young man, and the text says the bears tore them. It does not say they died. Then an army dying of thirst in Edom. Dig the valley full of ditches, he says, and you will see neither wind nor rain, and the ditches will fill. And at sunrise the water is there, and the sun on it looks red as blood. And the Moabites conclude the allied kings have slaughtered each other and charge into an ambush of their own making. Then a widow, in debt, with a creditor coming for her 2 children as slaves. Elisha asks what she has. 1 jar of oil. Borrow vessels, he says, and do not borrow few. And she pours, and the oil keeps coming, and it stops at the exact moment the last borrowed jar is full. The miracle is limited by her own faith and the size of the request. That is not a sermon point. That is what the text describes. Then the wealthy woman of Shunem, who builds him a room on her roof, and is promised a son about that time the following year. And the boy grows, and one day in the harvest field says, my head, and dies on her knees at noon. And she rides for the prophet. He sends his servant ahead with his staff to lay on the child's face, and nothing happens. The staff does not work. So Elisha comes himself, and shuts the door, and lies on the boy, mouth to mouth, eyes to eyes, hands to hands. And the child sneezes 7 times and opens his eyes. Then a famine, and a pot of stew with wild gourds in it, and men shouting, there is death in the pot. He throws in flour, and it is safe. Then a man brings 20 barley loaves and fresh grain, and Elisha says, give it to the men. 100 of them. His servant asks the obvious question, and they eat, and have some left over. Centuries before a hillside in Galilee, the same shape of miracle, ending on the same detail. There was food left. Then Naaman, a foreign general with a skin disease, arriving with silver and gold and a letter from his king, expecting a ceremony. And Elisha does not come out. He sends a messenger, go wash in the Jordan 7 times. And Naaman is furious because it is not grand enough to be worth the journey. His servants talk him down. He washes 7 times, and his flesh is restored like the flesh of a little child, and the healing cost him nothing at all. Which is why, when Elisha's servant Gehazi runs after the general and lies to collect the payment his master refused, the disease transfers to him. Then the smallest miracle in the Bible, and it is my favorite. A student is felling trees by the Jordan, and the axe head flies off into the water, and he cries out, because it was borrowed. That is the whole crisis. A poor man has lost a tool he does not own. And the prophet who called down famine and raised the dead cuts a stick, throws it in, and makes the iron float. The same power spent on somebody's debt. Then the Aramean army surrounds the city at night to capture him, and his servant panics. And Elisha prays, "Open his eyes." And the young man looks up, and the mountain is full of horses and chariots of fire all around them. They were there the whole time. Then Elisha prays a second time and strikes the entire army with blindness. And here is where the thread from Genesis comes back, because the rare Hebrew word for that blindness appears exactly twice in the Bible, at Lot's door in Sodom and here. The same weapon, more than 1,000 years apart. He leads the blind army into the middle of the enemy capital and opens their eyes there, and the king of Israel asks, "Shall I kill them?" And Elisha says no. Set bread and water before them and send them home. And a great feast is made, and they go, and the raids stop for a while. And his last miracle happens after he is dead. Raiders interrupt a burial, and the mourners throw the body into Elisha's grave. And the man touches the bones of Elisha, and revives, and stands on his feet. The power outlasted the prophet by a generation. That is not number 2. Roughly 30 miracles again, across 2 lifetimes, and again at a moment when the whole thing was about to be lost. Because that is what the 9th century is. It is the century when the northern kingdom formally adopts another god, and then the wonders stop again. 2 more remain in the land, and they belong to 1 king and 1 very bad week. Hezekiah is sick to death and told to set his house in order. He turns his face to the wall and weeps, and the sentence is reversed, and he is given 15 more years. And he asks for a sign. And in Kings, the prophet offers him a choice. Shall the shadow go forward 10 steps or back 10 steps? And Hezekiah picks backwards on the grounds that forward is too easy, so the shadow on the steps goes back 10. Isaiah tells the same event without the choice. And then the Assyrians. An army that has taken every city it besieged sits outside Jerusalem, and the king lays the enemy's letter out in the temple and prays. And that night the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when they rose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead bodies. The largest death toll of any single miracle in Scripture, in one sentence, off stage. And that is the last miracle in the land. Everything after this happens somewhere else, because there is no longer anywhere else to happen. Jerusalem falls. The temple burns. The people are marched to Babylon, and the miracles resume in the one place nobody expected. Not in a wilderness. Not on a mountain. In an imperial court, in a foreign capital, in front of an audience of civil servants. 3 men refuse to bow to a statue, and the furnace is heated 7 times more than usual, so hot that the soldiers who carry them to it are killed by the flame. And the king looks in and counts. Did we not throw 3 men in, bound? And he says, I see 4 men unbound, walking in the fire, unhurt. And the appearance of the 4th is like a son of the gods. They come out with no burns, no singed hair, no scorched clothes, and no smell of fire on them. Then a wonder performed on a single mind. Nebuchadnezzar is driven from among men for 7 periods of time. He eats grass like an ox, his hair grows like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws, and then his reason returns to him, and he blesses the Most High. Then his successor throws a feast, and the fingers of a human hand appear and write on the plaster of the wall opposite the lampstand. 4 words. Nobody in the room can read. Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. Numbered, weighed, divided. And that very night, Belshazzar is killed. And then the lions. A new king, Darius, tricked by his own officials into signing a law he cannot repeal. And the old man opens his windows toward Jerusalem and prays 3 times a day, exactly as he always has, in full view of the men waiting to report him. And in the morning the king runs to the pit and calls out, and the answer comes up. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. And the accusers are thrown in, and the text is grim about it. Before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them. The lions were fine. The lions were always fine. And one miracle is left, and it is not in the exile at all, and it is the most famous of them. The Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah, and Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. A great fish. The Hebrew says fish. There is no whale anywhere in the book. The whale swims in through a Greek word in the Gospels and an English translation centuries later. And the fish is not even the point. The verb, appointed, is used 4 times in that short book, and the fish is only the first. God appoints a plant to grow over a sulking prophet and shade his head, then appoints a worm to kill the plant, then appoints a scorching east wind. The same word for the fish that saves him and the worm that ruins his morning. The book puts the enormous miracle and the tiny one in exactly the same grammatical category. And that is the list. From Enoch's disappearance to a worm in a plant, that is every miracle the Hebrew scriptures narrate. Now stand back and look at the shape of it, because that is the thing you cannot see from inside any one story. 2 mountains. One at the Exodus and the Conquest, around Moses and Joshua. One in the 9th century before Christ, around Elijah and Elisha. Roughly 30 miracles in each. And between them and around them, long flat stretches with almost nothing at all. The judges. The united monarchy. Most of the kings of Judah. Nearly all the writing prophets. Isaiah, Jeremiah, Hosea, Amos, Micah, with barely a wonder between them. Jeremiah watches his city burn and performs no signs. Amos confronts an empire with nothing but sentences. The prophetic books are almost entirely miracle-free. So, what are the 2 mountains actually for? Look at when they happen. The first cluster is the founding. There is no nation. There is a slave population with no land, no law, no name, and no reason to believe anything. Everything has to be established from nothing. And the miracles are how the text says a people came into existence who had no business existing. The second cluster is the near extinction, not political, religious. The North has officially adopted Baal. The line of the prophets is being hunted. Elijah says he is the only one left. He is wrong, and God tells him so, but he is not wrong about the direction of travel. So the miracles come back, and they come back aimed precisely at Baal's job description. Rain, fire, bread, life from the dead. It is not a display of power. It is an argument, and every single miracle in that cycle is on topic. And in between, when there is a king and an army and a temple and a functioning nation, the sky is quiet, which is the uncomfortable part. Because if you have ever measured whether God is near by whether anything unusual is happening, this book does not support that arithmetic. Solomon's era is the most religiously equipped moment in the whole story, and it has 1 fire and 1 cloud. Israel's most desperate moment has 30 wonders. The miracles are not thermometers of faith. They are load-bearing. They appear where the structure would otherwise collapse and nowhere else. And notice what most of them are actually for. We remember the seas and the fire and the sun standing still because those are the ones that paint well. But the running total is dominated by food, flour that does not run out, oil that keeps pouring, bread on the ground every morning for 40 years, stew made safe, water made sweet with a log, 20 loaves stretched over 100 men, a borrowed axe head retrieved for a man who could not have replaced it. The spectacular ones are outnumbered by the domestic ones, and by a wide margin. Most of the miracles in the Old Testament are about dinner, debt, and children. And one last thing, easy to miss when you read them one at a time. Elijah is sent to a Phoenician widow. Elisha heals a Syrian general. The talking donkey rebukes a foreign diviner. The ark humbles a Philistine god without a single Israelite in the room. Over and over, the wonders leak outside the borders they were supposedly given for. The list has a habit of ending up in the wrong country. So that is every miracle in the Hebrew Scriptures, in the order they come. And the pattern underneath them is not that God shows up when people are good. It is that God shows up when the story is about to end and refuses to let it. And then, for long stretches, nothing. Rain in season, harvests, kings, ordinary years unrecorded, going on and on, which is apparently also the plan.